When the mind quiets, clarity arrives. Buddhist teaching. There comes a moment in every human life when noise becomes unbearable, not the external noise of cities, engines, or voices, but the inner noise that never seems to stop. It is the storm of thoughts, fears, memories, anticipations, judgments, desires, regrets, and stories that the mind repeats again and again. Most people live inside that storm as if it were the only possible reality. Yet the Buddhist path reminds us of something profoundly simple. Silence is always available. Even before we understand it, silence surrounds us like the sky surrounds the earth. But to access that silence, the mind must learn how to quiet itself, how to rest, how to let go of the compulsive habit of thinking. When the mind quiets, clarity arrives, not because clarity is created, but because it was always present beneath the noise. The Buddha taught that the mind, left untrained, behaves like a restless monkey jumping from branch to branch, never satisfied, never still. In modern life, the monkey mind has become even louder, fueled by constant stimulation, digital distraction, pressure to perform, and the fear of falling behind. People search for clarity by adding more information, more activities, more advice, more strategies, more voices, but clarity does not come from accumulation. It arises from the gentle reduction of mental clutter, from the ability to pause, from the art of returning to the present moment again and again. Stillness is not inactivity. Silence is not emptiness. When the mind becomes quiet, it becomes attuned. It becomes capable of seeing reality as it is, without distortion. The teachings of the Buddha invite us to understand that liberation begins not with action, but with awareness. And awareness becomes sharp only when the inner waters are calm. Imagine trying to see your own reflection in a lake that is violently shaking. The image will always appear broken, unclear, and confusing. But when the water settles, the reflection becomes accurate. The same happens with the mind. This text explores why quieting the mind is one of the most transformative practices on the Buddhist path, how clarity emerges naturally from stillness, and how any person, regardless of background, can begin to cultivate this inner space. Each topic will unfold deeply, guiding you into the subtle layers of inner silence and mental clarity, not as abstract ideals, but as living experiences you can cultivate every day. In a world that trains us to move faster, think louder, and push harder, these teachings offer the radical alternative of inner slowing, softened perception, and awakened attention. True clarity is not something you force. It is something that rises when you stop forcing. The nature of inner noise and why the mind fears silence. To understand why clarity arises only when the mind quiets, we must first understand why the mind is noisy in the first place. Noise is not an accident. It is a habit. It is a defense mechanism. It is a mask for deeper discomforts we do not want to feel, and it is a deeply conditioned pattern that modern life reinforces constantly. In Buddhist teachings, the mind's noise is often described as a combination of three forces: desire, aversion, and ignorance. These three create endless thoughts, fantasies, anxieties, judgments, and comparisons. The mind becomes trapped in its own projections, losing contact with immediate experience. As a result, people live more in their imagined world than in the actual world. The first truth about mental noise is that it is self-generated. Even when life is quiet, the mind can be stormy. A person sitting alone in a peaceful room can be more internally agitated than someone walking through a crowded street. This is because the mind carries its noise everywhere. That noise takes the form of inner narratives, memories, imagined futures, rehearsed conversations, resentments, expectations, and interpretations. The Buddha called this proliferation of thought papanka, a term meaning mental elaboration or conceptual expansion. The mind takes a simple moment and stretches it into a large story. Something small becomes something huge. A single thought becomes a chain of reactions, and soon the mind is no longer experiencing the moment, but drowning in a mental world of its own creation. Why does the mind do this? Fundamentally, the mind fears silence because silence exposes truth. When thoughts quiet down, feelings rise to the surface. The rawness of being becomes visible. We notice discomfort, anxiety, longing, emptiness, or uncertainty. Mental noise acts like a protective blanket, covering everything we do not want to feel. When the mind is busy thinking, we do not have to face the deeper layers of our inner world. This is why many people become restless or uneasy when sitting still. The body is still, but the mind resists stillness. It is used to constant movement and stimulation. Another layer of noise comes from social conditioning. From childhood, we learn to use thinking as a primary method of control. We are taught to analyze, plan, anticipate, predict, evaluate, justify, and explain. These cognitive habits are valuable in practical life, but they become harmful when they dominate everything. The mind becomes addicted to its own activity. It starts believing that without constant thinking, something bad will happen, that life will fall apart, that danger will arise, or that we will lose our sense of self. In Buddhism, this illusion is connected to attachment to the ego, a mental construction that needs constant reinforcement through thoughts like, I am this, I want this, I need to protect that, or I must appear in a certain way. The ego feeds on noise. Silence threatens it. This is why quieting the mind is both simple and profoundly challenging. The moment the mind slows down, the ego feels it is disappearing. But what disappears is not the true self, it is the false identity built on thought. When the mind becomes quiet, what remains is awareness, the open, spacious, unconditioned presence that is our true nature. This is what Buddhist teachings point to when they speak of bodhi, awakening. Mental noise also arises from fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of losing control, fear of uncertainty, fear of discomfort, fear of failure, fear of being unprepared, fear of not being enough. Thoughts multiply to create a sense of security, even if that security is an illusion. The mind imagines problems in order to imagine solutions. It creates scenarios to feel prepared. It replays past mistakes, thinking that by doing so it can prevent future suffering. And yet all of this mental activity creates the very suffering it tries to avoid. The Buddha emphasized that suffering is not created by circumstances, but by the mind's relationship to circumstances. A noisy mind reacts to everything. A quiet mind responds clearly. Modern life adds another dimension: overstimulation. The mind is constantly bombarded by messages, images, notifications, expectations, goals, advertisements, conversations, and comparisons. The mind rarely rests. There is always something to absorb or something to resist, but the mind is not built to stay in constant activation. When overstimulated, it becomes exhausted, fragmented, and confused. Internal noise grows louder because the mind keeps processing, digesting, and interpreting more than it can handle. Silence becomes almost alien. The Buddhist path teaches that noise settles naturally when we stop feeding it. The problem is not the presence of thoughts, but our attachment to them. Thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky of awareness. Noise arises when we identify with every cloud, trying to control it, analyze it, or fight it. When the mind quiets, clouds still appear, but they pass without creating storms. This quieting is not forced. It is not suppression. It is the natural result of returning attention to the present moment, where the mind has no material to build stories. Clarity arises only in this space. Clarity is not a thought. It is not an intellectual conclusion. It is a direct seeing, a recognition of reality without mental distortion. when the inner waters settle, clarity becomes effortless. We see things as they are: relationships, decisions, patterns of behavior, old wounds, false beliefs, moments of beauty and moments of truth. We become able to discern what truly matters and what has been created by conditioned fear. The nature of inner noise also includes the mind's habit of reacting instantly. When something happens, the mind produces a chain of interpretations. Someone raises their voice, and the mind concludes they are angry. A friend delays answering a message, and the mind assumes rejection. A plan changes unexpectedly, and the mind automatically generates fear. Inner noise eliminates space between stimulus and response, but clarity requires space. The Buddha taught that wisdom arises in the gap between observing and reacting. When the mind quiets, that gap expands. We see our own reactions before we become them, and in that seeing, freedom begins. Quieting the mind is not about eliminating thoughts. It is about understanding them. When we observe thoughts without identifying with them, their power dissolves. Noise becomes just sound. A storm becomes simply weather passing through. The mind learns it does not have to follow every thought. This is the beginning of mental freedom. Over time, inner silence reveals deeper truths. The first truth is that we are not our thoughts. We are the awareness that sees thoughts. This realization transforms life. We begin to let go of the need to control everything. We stop obsessing over outcomes. We release the pressure to appear perfect. We find calm in uncertainty. We accept change with more grace. Silence becomes not only a state, but a refuge, a sanctuary inside ourselves. The second truth revealed by quieting the mind is that peace is always here. It is not something to be acquired. It is not something we must earn. It is our natural state obscured by mental noise. When the noise fades, peace appears. This peace is not dependent on external circumstances. It does not require life to be perfect. It arises from the simple act of resting in the present moment fully. The third truth is clarity is not fragile. It does not vanish when life becomes difficult. A quiet mind can navigate storms better than a restless mind. Challenges become opportunities to deepen awareness. Suffering becomes a teacher. Pain becomes a signal rather than a punishment. Every experience becomes easier to understand because clarity illuminates a path forward. Why does the mind resist silence if silence is so healing? Because the mind was trained to equate activity with survival. Long ago, constant thinking helped humans anticipate danger. But in the modern world, the same mechanism creates unnecessary suffering. The mind believes that quieting down is risky, yet the risk is only to the illusions the mind has created. Silence does not harm us, it reveals us. To quiet the mind, we must first respect its habits. For years, perhaps decades, it has been operating in a certain way. It has been constantly stimulated, rewarded for thinking, praised for overanalyzing, and encouraged to stay busy. When we begin practicing silence, the mind often becomes louder at first. This is not failure, it is release. Thoughts stored for years rise to the surface. Unfelt emotions emerge. Discomfort appears. But this is a necessary purification. A river becomes clearer only when the sediment is stirred before it settles. The Buddhist path suggests gentle methods to approach this process. Mindful breathing, observing sensations, walking meditation, sitting quietly, listening deeply, noticing reactions, or simply being present while drinking tea. These practices are not escapes. They are returns to the body, to the senses, to the moment, to awareness. Each return weakens the habit of noise. Over time, the mind discovers it does not need to react to everything. It does not need to judge everything. It does not need to chase every thought. It can rest, and in that rest, clarity begins to bloom like a lotus emerging from still water. Insight arises not from effort, but from spaciousness. To conclude this first topic, the essential understanding is this: noise is learned, silence is natural, noise is effort, clarity is effortless, noise is resistance, silence is acceptance. The mind fears silence because silence unmasks truth, but only in silence does truth become visible. And once truth becomes visible, life becomes simpler, lighter, and more meaningful. If this journey resonates with you, and if you want to continue receiving teachings that deepen your path toward inner peace and spiritual clarity, consider subscribing to the channel so you never miss the next insight and can continue walking this path of awakening with guidance and support. The path to stillness, how the mind learns to rest. The greatest paradox of the human condition is that peace is always present, yet it must be learned. The mind's natural state is calm awareness, but years of conditioning have made it restless, anxious, and perpetually seeking. Quieting the mind is therefore not a process of acquiring something new, but of remembering something ancient. The path to stillness is not built through struggle, but through surrender. It is the art of unlearning, of letting go of unnecessary movements, of recognizing that behind every thought and emotion there is already a silence that holds everything. That silence is not empty, it is full of clarity, wisdom, and compassion. When people first approach meditation or Buddhist practice, they often carry the belief that they must make the mind quiet. They sit down, close their eyes, and begin fighting thoughts as if stillness were a prize to be won. But this very act of striving strengthens the noise. The mind, when told to be silent, becomes defensive. It tries to perform silence, to imitate peace, and in doing so creates more disturbance. The Buddha's teaching is subtle. You cannot force the ocean to calm, but you can stop stirring it. You can learn to stop feeding agitation with resistance. Stillness begins with awareness. Awareness is the light that reveals the constant movement of the mind. When you observe thoughts without judgment, you start to notice their patterns, their triggers, their repetitive cycles. Some thoughts appear like waves, brief, harmless, quickly dissolving. Others arise like storms, intense, emotional, and overwhelming, but all share one common trait: they arise and pass away. In Buddhist understanding, everything that arises also ceases. This is impermanence, one of the core teachings of the Dharma. When we truly see impermanence in our own thoughts, we no longer cling to them as solid truths. We let them come and go, and in that letting go, the natural stillness beneath them becomes visible. The process of returning to stillness can be imagined like walking into a quiet forest after years in a noisy city. At first, the silence feels strange, even uncomfortable. You might still hear the echo of traffic in your mind, the lingering noise of mental movement. But if you stay long enough, the subtler sounds begin to appear: the whisper of wind through leaves, the heartbeat of the forest itself. Similarly, when the mind is first invited into stillness, old habits echo loudly. Memories resurface. The nervous system, accustomed to activity, protests. But if you persist gently, the deeper music of silence starts to emerge, and the mind begins to trust rest. This trust is essential, because the restless mind does not initially believe that rest is safe. It equates stillness with stagnation. It feels that if it stops thinking, it will lose control, that if it relaxes, life will fall apart. The mind has been trained to survive by constant vigilance, by anticipating danger, by maintaining tension. The first step on the path to stillness, then, is reassurance. You must show your own mind that it is safe to rest. The body helps in this. When the body relaxes, the mind begins to follow. A deep breath signals to the nervous system that there is no immediate threat. The Buddha often emphasized mindfulness of breathing for this reason. It connects body and mind in the rhythm of the present moment. anchoring awareness in something simple and real. To quiet the mind, begin by noticing the breath as it is, not forcing it, not controlling it, simply observing. Notice the inhale, the exhale, the spaces between. Every breath becomes a reminder that life is unfolding right now. Thoughts may arise. Let them. You do not need to push them away. You also do not need to follow them. Allow them to exist without reaction. This simple act of allowing creates spaciousness. The more you observe, the less you interfere. And the less you interfere, the more naturally the mind settles. Over time, you begin to see that thoughts lose their density when they are observed. What once felt heavy and solid becomes transparent. This transparency is the beginning of clarity. Stillness does not mean the absence of thoughts. It means thoughts no longer dominate your perception. They pass like clouds across an open sky. You remain as the sky itself, vast, unchanging, capable of holding everything without being disturbed. Buddhist practice offers many doorways into this experience of stillness. One of the most direct is mindfulness, or sati. Mindfulness is not simply awareness of the present. It is the quality of non-reactive awareness. When you are mindful, you witness sensations, emotions, and thoughts, without labeling them as good or bad. This witnessing transforms everything it touches. Anger, when seen clearly, loses its fire. Fear, when embraced by awareness, softens into understanding. Desire, when observed without judgment, reveals its underlying longing for peace. Every emotion, when met with awareness, becomes a teacher. The path to stillness, therefore, involves learning to stay present with whatever arises. Instead of running away from discomfort, you turn toward it with gentle curiosity. You ask, "What is this feeling? What is it teaching me?" You do not analyze it intellectually, but you experience it directly in the body, the tightening in the chest, the warmth in the face, the trembling in the hands. You breathe through it, you allow it to exist. Slowly, the emotion completes its natural cycle and fades away. Every time you stay present like this, the mind learns that it no longer needs to react compulsively. It begins to trust awareness. This trust deepens with consistent practice. Meditation is not a performance, it is a relationship. Each time you sit in silence, you are renewing that relationship with your own mind. Some days will feel peaceful, other days will feel chaotic. Both are part of the path. What matters is not the absence of noise, but your willingness to stay present through it. Even agitation, when seen clearly, becomes an object of meditation. You begin to understand that there is no bad meditation. There is only honest seeing. One of the greatest obstacles to stillness is expectation. The mind often asks, "When will I finally be calm? When will I stop thinking? When will I achieve enlightenment?" These questions create more restlessness. The Buddha compared such striving to trying to smooth water with your hand. The more you move, the more ripples you create. The secret is to let go of the goal. When you stop trying to reach stillness, stillness finds you. It arises in the absence of struggle. Imagine a bird flying across the sky. It leaves no trace behind. The mind in stillness is like that. It moves through experience without clinging to it, without leaving marks of attachment or resistance. This freedom of movement is what Buddhists call liberation. It is not something distant or mystical. It is the natural ease of a mind that no longer fights with itself. The training towards stillness also involves ethical understanding. The Buddha taught that right action, right speech, and right livelihood are not only moral principles, but foundations for mental peace. When our actions are guided by honesty, compassion, and awareness, the mind naturally feels lighter. Guilt, deception, and harm create inner conflict which manifests as noise. Thus, inner stillness is supported by outer harmony. Living truthfully, speaking kindly, and acting mindfully are all expressions of inner clarity. Compassion is another gate into stillness. When the heart opens, the mind relaxes. Harshness, whether directed toward ourselves or others, generates turbulence. Compassion softens this turbulence. The Dalai Lama often says, "My religion is kindness." Kindness quiets the mind because it aligns us with the natural flow of existence. When we stop judging and start understanding, the inner storm begins to settle. Patience is equally crucial. Stillness is not achieved in a single moment of meditation. It unfolds gradually, like dawn dissolving the darkness. The sun does not rush to rise, it simply appears when conditions are right. Similarly, the mind becomes still when the right conditions of awareness, acceptance, and patience are present. Impatience only strengthens agitation. But if you stay faithful to the practice, you will notice that quiet moments start appearing spontaneously throughout your day. You might be walking, washing dishes, listening to someone, or waiting at a traffic light, and suddenly you feel an unexpected calm. The noise fades for a few seconds, and in its place, you sense an expansive clarity. These moments are signs of awakening. They are not created by effort, but by presence. The mind begins to recognize stillness, not as something external, but as its own ground. As you progress on the path, you may notice that stillness is not passive. It is alive, aware, intelligent. It listens deeply. When the mind is quiet, understanding arises naturally. You see connections you never saw before. You notice subtle movements of energy in yourself and others. You recognize the impermanence of emotions as they come and go. You realize that every reaction is optional, that peace is always one breath away. This is the birth of true wisdom. The Buddha described wisdom as seeing things as they truly are. Most people see through the filter of mental noise. The mind interprets reality according to its conditioning, its fears, preferences, memories, and desires. When the mind quiets, those filters fall away. You begin to see reality without distortion. A tree is simply a tree, not a symbol of your success or failure. A conversation is simply a moment of exchange, not a battlefield of ego. This clarity transforms how you live. Decisions become simpler, relationships become gentler, suffering decreases because you no longer create stories around pain. Another aspect of this path is humility. A quiet mind does not need to prove itself. It no longer seeks validation through arguments or recognition. It is content with being. This humility is powerful because it allows learning to continue indefinitely. The quieter the mind, the more it can listen. And the more it listens, the more it learns directly from life itself. Every moment becomes a teacher. The sound of rain, the silence between words, the sensation of breath moving through the body. To walk the path to stillness also means accepting imperfection. The mind will never be silent forever. Thoughts will always arise. Emotions will always fluctuate. The difference is that you no longer get lost in them. You experience them fully and let them go. Even enlightenment in Buddhist understanding is not a permanent state of bliss, but the deep realization of impermanence itself. It is freedom from clinging to anything, including silence. This insight leads to a mature stillness. At first, stillness feels like an escape from chaos, but eventually, you see that chaos and stillness coexist. The world remains noisy, people remain unpredictable, challenges continue to arise, yet inside you, there is a space that remains untouched. You carry that stillness into every situation. You speak from it. You act from it. You love from it. It becomes your foundation. The mind that learns to rest also becomes compassionate toward its own restlessness. You no longer judge yourself for having thoughts. You no longer punish yourself for distractions. You understand that the human mind is like the ocean, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, but always vast. The storms do not define it. This compassion toward yourself is essential because harsh self-discipline hardens the heart. The Buddha's way is the middle way, not indulgence, not suppression, but balance. Balance is the true art of living. The path to stillness does not demand withdrawal from the world, but a new relationship with it. You can engage in work, relationships, and responsibilities without losing inner calm. In fact, stillness enhances your effectiveness. When the mind is quiet, perception sharpens, intuition deepens, and decisions become wiser. You act not from impulse, but from insight. You speak not to dominate, but to communicate truth. You live not to escape suffering, but to understand it. In silence, creativity blossoms. The greatest insights, inventions, and works of art arise from still minds. Because clarity is spacious, it allows inspiration to flow through unobstructed. Many artists, philosophers, and scientists have intuitively discovered this. They speak of moments when the mind stops thinking and something larger takes over. In Buddhism, this is called non-self, action free from egoic interference. The more still you become, the more naturally creative and compassionate your life becomes. The still mind also experiences time differently. In noise, time feels fragmented. We are either regretting the past or anticipating the future. In stillness, time expands into the eternal present. You realize that every moment contains infinity. There is nowhere else to go, nothing else to achieve. This realization dissolves the anxious chase of modern life. You stop running, you start being. Stillness teaches you to listen not only to your thoughts, but to life itself. You begin to sense the subtle rhythm of existence, the pulse that connects everything. You notice synchronicities, intuitive nudges, the natural unfolding of events. Decisions that once felt complex become obvious because you are attuned to the deeper intelligence that guides all things. This is not mystical thinking, it is direct perception of reality, unclouded by mental noise. Eventually, the boundary between meditation and life disappears. You no longer need to sit formally to access stillness. It accompanies you everywhere. You can be in conversation and still feel the silent presence beneath your words. You can be in movement and still sense the unmoving awareness within. This integration is the fruit of the path, the union of silence and activity, of clarity and compassion. To cultivate this, the Buddha encouraged 4 foundations of mindfulness. Mindfulness of the body, of feelings, of mind, and of phenomena. These are not rigid steps, but gateways to direct experience. Through awareness of the body, you stay grounded in the physical present. Through awareness of feelings, you understand the emotional texture of experience. Through awareness of the mind, you see thoughts as transient. And through awareness of phenomena, you perceive the interdependence of all things. Each layer supports the others, deepening stillness. Ultimately, the mind learns that rest is not the absence of life, but the fullness of it. When you are still, you become profoundly alive because you are fully here. The sensory world becomes vivid, the color of leaves, the sound of footsteps, the warmth of sunlight. Ordinary moments become sacred. Gratitude arises naturally, not as a moral duty, but as spontaneous recognition of life's miracle. This is the essence of Buddhist teaching, to awaken not in some distant heaven, but in this moment. When the mind quiets, the ordinary reveals its extraordinary depth. Clarity is not a special power. It is the natural vision of an undisturbed mind. Peace is not a rare condition. It is the natural fragrance of awareness when it is no longer clouded by grasping. The more you rest in this stillness, the more you see that nothing is missing. You do not need to become someone else. You do not need to fix the world to feel complete. The world, in its imperfection, becomes the perfect field for practice. Every noise becomes a reminder of silence. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to deepen awareness. As the mind quiets, love becomes effortless. You love not because you seek something, but because love is what remains when noise dissolves. Compassion, forgiveness, understanding, all flow naturally from the silent heart. The Buddha's smile, calm yet radiant, symbolizes this state, a serenity that no external condition can disturb. In the end, the path to stillness is the path back to yourself, the self that is not defined by thoughts or roles but by presence. It is a homecoming, a remembering of what you have always been beneath the turbulence of the mind. The clarity that arrives in silence is not new knowledge. It is ancient recognition. It is the understanding that life as it is enough. So when you next feel overwhelmed, do not rush to fix or analyze. Simply stop, breathe. Feel the ground beneath you. Listen to the silence behind sounds. Watch thoughts come and go. Do nothing, and you will discover that everything begins to fall into place. The mind does not need to control reality. It only needs to stop resisting it. This is how the mind learns to rest, not through effort but through trust. And in that rest, clarity arrives, quietly, like dawn breaking across the horizon after a long night. If this message resonates with your journey toward inner peace, and you wish to explore more teachings that bring stillness, awareness, and clarity into your life, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Each new reflection continues this sacred path of awakening, guiding you toward a quieter mind and a more luminous heart. The still mind sees truth clearly. When the mind begins to quiet, a new world starts to reveal itself, not because the external world has changed, but because the lens through which you perceive it has been cleansed of distortion. The noisy mind interprets everything through its own conditioning. It judges before it understands, it reacts before it sees, and it builds stories before it listens. But a still mind, one that has learned to rest in awareness, perceives reality without interference. It does not project, it does not assume, it simply observes, and in that observation, truth becomes visible. The still mind does not need to search for answers, because clarity itself is the answer. The Buddha often compared this clarity to a mirror. When clean, it reflects everything exactly as it is. When covered with dust, it distorts and hides what is real. The practice of quieting the mind is the process of removing the dust that has accumulated through years of mental habit and attachment. The most profound aspect of this stillness is that it reveals not only external truth, but also inner truth. People often live disconnected from their own essence, guided more by fear and conditioning than by direct understanding. When the mind is full of noise, self-deception thrives. You convince yourself that you are content when you are not, that you are in control when you are lost, that you understand life when you have only memorized concepts. The mind builds walls of ideas around experience, and these walls become prisons. But when the noise fades, those walls dissolve, and you begin to encounter yourself as you truly are, raw, open, alive, and vast. This meeting can be both terrifying and liberating. Terrifying because it strips away illusions. Liberating because it returns you to authenticity. In stillness, the mind no longer hides behind explanations. It faces life directly. This direct seeing is what Buddhist wisdom calls insight, vipassana. It is not intellectual understanding, but experiential realization. Insight arises when the mind is calm enough to observe phenomena without clinging or aversion. You start to see how everything arises and passes away. You see how desire creates tension, how attachment creates suffering, how clinging to identity leads to fear. You see cause and effect unfolding moment by moment. This seeing is not learned from books or teachers. It is discovered in the silent laboratory of your own awareness. And once you see, you cannot unsee. The truth becomes self-evident. The still mind perceives life not as a collection of separate things, but as an interconnected flow. It recognizes the interdependence of all phenomena. Nothing exists independently. Everything arises in relation to everything else. This understanding, known as dependent origination, dissolves the illusion of separation that causes so much suffering. When you realize that your happiness is connected to the happiness of others, compassion becomes natural. When you see that anger harms you more than the one you direct it toward, forgiveness becomes inevitable. The still mind does not force morality. Morality arises spontaneously from clear perception. Clarity also changes how you experience impermanence. In noise, impermanence feels like loss. We cling to people, moments, and identities, fearing that their disappearance will leave us empty. But in stillness, impermanence becomes beauty. You begin to see the elegance of life's constant change, like waves rising and falling on the ocean. You see that nothing truly dies, it transforms. The flower wilts to feed the soil that gives birth to another bloom. The sunset that ends the day becomes the light of a new dawn. The self you were yesterday dissolves to make space for the one you are becoming today. Stillness reveals that life's transience is not tragedy. It is the essence of vitality. When the mind is quiet, it no longer resists this natural flow. It no longer fights to make the temporary permanent. Resistance creates suffering. Acceptance creates peace. The still mind accepts because it sees. It does not accept blindly, but with full awareness that everything belongs to the same movement of existence. You realize that even pain, confusion, and uncertainty have their place. They are not mistakes, they are teachers. In the stillness of awareness, nothing is rejected. Every experience becomes part of awakening. This clarity extends beyond thought. The still mind begins to perceive subtle layers of reality that are invisible to conceptual thinking. You sense the aliveness of nature, the silent intelligence within every living thing, the energy that connects all forms. You feel the pulse of life moving through you, breathing you, living you. The boundary between observer and observed fades. You no longer feel separate from the world, but part of its unfolding. The leaves moving in the wind, the waves touching the shore, the heart beating in your chest, all become one continuous movement. This experience is what Buddhist mystics call non-duality. It is not an abstract philosophy, but a direct perception. Everything you see is yourself, and you are everything you see. In this state, fear loses its foundation. Fear thrives on separation, on the belief that you are an isolated self, vulnerable to an external world. But when separation dissolves, fear dissolves with it. The still mind does not mean a fearless mind in the sense of aggression or courage. It means a mind free from the illusion that creates fear. The universe no longer appears as a threat, but as a partner. You no longer ask, "What will happen to me?" because you recognize that me and happening are not two different things. Life flows through you, not against you. This realization changes your relationship with suffering. You stop asking why suffering exists and begin to see how suffering arises. You understand that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional, born from resistance and misperception. The still mind does not avoid pain, but meets it with awareness. It allows pain to express its message, to pass through, to teach. In doing so, pain loses its power to dominate. This is not indifference, it is understanding. Compassion grows from this understanding because you recognize the shared nature of human struggle. You see that every being suffers in ignorance, chasing illusions that promise fulfillment but deliver more restlessness. Your response is no longer judgment but empathy. Clarity also transforms action. The still mind acts without confusion. It does not need to overthink because wisdom guides it naturally. Decisions become effortless, not because life becomes easy, but because resistance is gone. You no longer waste energy fighting against what is. When action arises from stillness, it is precise, effective, and compassionate. This is what the Buddha called right action, not moral superiority, but harmony between understanding and behavior. A still mind does not act to satisfy ego, it acts to maintain balance within the web of existence. Communication also changes. Words spoken from stillness carry weight, not because they are loud, but because they are true. Silence gives birth to authenticity. The still mind does not speak to impress, to defend, or to dominate. It speaks to express truth and understanding. And sometimes it does not speak at all, knowing that silence itself can communicate more deeply than words. Many of the Buddha's greatest teachings were delivered in silence because presence itself transmits wisdom beyond language. This deep clarity also reshapes your relationship with desire. Desire, in its raw form, is not wrong. It is energy, movement. But when filtered through ignorance, it becomes craving, attachment, and suffering. The still mind does not suppress desire, it sees through it. It understands that every desire points toward a deeper longing for peace and wholeness. When you see this clearly, desire loses its grip. You no longer chase shadows because you recognize that what you seek has never been absent. Fulfillment does not come from obtaining objects, but from resting in awareness. This is why the Buddha called enlightenment the end of craving. It is not the end of living, but the end of searching. As the mind quiets, gratitude naturally arises. You begin to appreciate existence not for what it gives you, but for what it is. You realize that every moment is a miracle, every breath a gift. You stop waiting for extraordinary experiences because the ordinary becomes extraordinary when seen clearly. Washing a cup, feeling the warmth of sunlight, hearing a bird's song, all these become gateways to sacred awareness. Life ceases to be a series of problems to solve and becomes an unfolding mystery to behold. This seeing also heals relationships. The still mind does not demand that others change. It understands that everyone acts from their level of awareness. You stop trying to control or fix people and begin to relate to them with understanding. Compassion replaces judgment. Patience replaces frustration. You see the suffering behind others' actions, and instead of reacting, you respond with presence. This does not mean you tolerate harm or abandon discernment. It means you act with clarity rather than reactivity. A single word or gesture from such presence can transform an entire interaction. In stillness, forgiveness becomes effortless. Holding on to resentment requires constant mental effort. When the mind is quiet, that effort becomes too heavy to maintain. You see that forgiveness is not a gift to the other, but a liberation for yourself. You forgive not because someone deserves it, but because you deserve peace. The still mind understands that clinging to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other to suffer. When the noise of justification fades, forgiveness happens naturally. Perhaps the most beautiful quality of the still mind is humility. Clarity does not make you feel superior, it makes you disappear. You realize that wisdom is not yours, it belongs to life itself. You become a vessel for truth rather than its owner. This humility radiates peace. People feel it in your presence, even if you say nothing. The quiet energy of awareness influences others more deeply than argument or persuasion ever could. You become, in your own way, a silent teacher, not through authority, but through being. Yet this path is not linear. Even when the mind has tasted stillness, noise will return, old habits will reappear, life will test your balance. But now, you know the way back. You know that clarity is not lost. It is only momentarily obscured. Each return to silence strengthens the connection. You no longer despair when the mind becomes restless, because you recognize restlessness as part of the rhythm. You learn to dance with it, to flow with it, to meet it with the same awareness that met silence. Eventually, you realize that clarity and confusion are not opposites, but partners. Confusion gives birth to the desire for clarity. Clarity gives context to confusion. Both belong to the same whole. The still mind no longer divides experience into good and bad, success and failure, progress and regression. It sees all as movement within awareness. This acceptance dissolves the inner struggle for perfection. You no longer chase an ideal state. You rest in what is. This resting is freedom. The wisdom that emerges from such stillness is not philosophical but practical. It touches every aspect of life. When the mind is clear, you see what to eat, how to speak, when to act, when to rest. You live in harmony with natural rhythms. You no longer fight against the flow of time. You realize that patience is not waiting. It is participation in the unfolding of reality. The still mind participates fully in each moment, knowing there is nothing outside it. This awareness transforms even death. The fear of death arises from the belief in separation, the idea that you are a limited self that can end. But when stillness reveals the continuity of life, death loses its sting. You see that what dies is form, not essence. Awareness remains untouched. You no longer seek immortality because you see that you were never truly born, nor will you truly die. This realization does not lead to detachment from life, but to deeper appreciation. Every moment becomes precious precisely because it is transient. The still mind thus lives in gratitude, humility, and service. It no longer asks, "What can I gain?" but "What can I give?" Giving becomes natural because abundance flows through awareness. You are no longer a separate entity protecting your possessions, but an instrument through which life expresses generosity. Whether it is a smile, a word, or a silent prayer, everything you offer from stillness carries transformative power. The Buddha once said that enlightenment is like the moon reflected on water. The moon does not get wet, and the water is not disturbed. The reflection appears naturally when the water is calm. In the same way, truth reveals itself effortlessly in the still mind. You do not need to grasp it, you only need to stop disturbing the surface. Then clarity shines by itself, luminous and serene. And so, the invitation remains simple. Learn to be still, not as an escape, not as a technique, but as a return to your original nature. In stillness, the mind becomes a mirror for truth, the heart becomes a vessel for compassion, and life becomes an expression of wisdom. If these teachings speak to you, if they awaken in you the desire to live with more peace, presence, and clarity, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Together we can continue exploring the timeless path of Buddhist wisdom, deepening stillness and allowing the light of awareness to illuminate every corner of our lives. The art of letting go. Opening the door to freedom. The more deeply one enters the path of stillness, the more clearly one begins to see that suffering is born not from life itself, but from our refusal to let it flow. The Buddha's teaching on liberation can be summarized in a single phrase: let go. Yet this is perhaps the hardest lesson of all, because the mind, in its habitual grasping, does not know how to release. It has been conditioned to cling to ideas, to possessions, to people, to achievements, and to its own image of control. To the untrained mind, letting go feels like loss. But in truth, letting go is the rediscovery of space. It is the return to natural freedom, the freedom of awareness that holds everything, yet owns nothing. When the mind learns to loosen its grip, clarity expands like the sky after a storm. You begin to see that what you once feared losing was never truly yours, and what remains cannot be lost. The art of letting go begins with understanding the mechanism of attachment. Every thought, emotion, or desire that the mind clings to becomes a source of tension. You can feel this physically in the body, the tightness in the chest, the heaviness in the stomach, the contraction behind the eyes. Attachment is not only psychological, it is embodied. It is the energy of mine and me crystallized into resistance. The Buddha taught that attachment arises from craving, the thirst of the mind for permanence in an impermanent world. The mind seeks stability, identity, and security, but in doing so, it clings to what is constantly changing. This conflict between reality and expectation generates endless suffering. The flower wilts, the loved one changes, the plan fails, the dream dissolves. And because the mind insists that these things should not happen, it experiences pain again and again. Letting go, then, is not about indifference. It is about aligning with reality. It is the willingness to say yes to impermanence. When you observe the mind carefully, you notice how subtle clinging can be. It attaches not only to pleasant experiences, but also to pain, to stories of injustice, to identities built from suffering. The ego finds security even in its wounds, because those wounds define it. You can see this in the way people repeat stories of betrayal or failure long after the event has passed. The story becomes a shield, a justification for remaining closed. But the still mind sees through this illusion. It understands that every moment clung to is a prison, and every prison is self-created. Freedom begins not when life becomes perfect, but when you stop insisting that it should be. Letting go is not a single act, but a continuous practice like exhaling. Every breath invites release. You let go of the breath you have taken so that the next one may arrive. If you held on to each breath, you would suffocate. The same is true for thoughts, emotions, and experiences. Life flows through you, but the ego tries to hold it. Letting go means trusting the rhythm of existence. It means recognizing that you do not need to manage every outcome. You do not need to control the unfolding. Awareness itself is already in control because it is not separate from life. The universe does not need your permission to evolve. The rivers flow without effort, the seasons change without command, and your heart beats without your instruction. Freedom lies in surrendering to that natural intelligence. However, surrender does not mean passivity. It does not mean giving up on life. True surrender is active participation in the present moment without resistance. It is the courage to meet whatever arises with openness. When you stop trying to force reality to fit your preferences, you begin to see that reality is inherently compassionate. Even when it challenges you, it teaches you. Even when it takes something away, it gives you clarity. The losses that once felt like punishments become invitations to depth. Each ending is a doorway to awakening if you have the eyes to see it. One of the deepest attachments the mind carries is to identity, the belief that I am this. We cling to labels, roles, and histories, fearing that without them we will vanish. But identity is like a costume worn for a time. Beneath the costume, there is pure awareness. This awareness is not male or female, not young or old, not rich or poor. It simply is. To realize this, the mind must release its grip on self-image. You are not your successes or your failures, your memories or your opinions. You are the silent space in which all of these appear and disappear. When the mind truly understands this, the burden of self-concern dissolves. You no longer need to defend your image because you recognize that it was never solid to begin with. This recognition is the root of humility, peace, and compassion. Letting go of identity also transforms relationships. Much of the pain between people arises from the unconscious attempt to use others to affirm the self. We seek validation, attention, or control, and when others fail to provide it, we feel wounded. But when you let go of the idea that you need others to complete you, love becomes pure. It becomes an offering rather than a demand. You love because love flows naturally from freedom, not because you are trying to fill an emptiness. This is the essence of Buddhist compassion. Love without attachment. It is the love of the open heart, not the clinging heart. The open heart gives freely and receives freely because it is not protecting anything. As the mind learns to release, it also begins to see the futility of resistance. Resistance is the refusal to allow what is. It manifests as anger, frustration, or anxiety. It is the mind's attempt to fight the present. But the present moment is immovable. No amount of resistance can change it. When you resist, you suffer twice, once from the situation itself and once from your reaction to it. Acceptance, on the other hand, transforms everything it touches. The still mind accepts because it sees that what is happening is already happening. Acceptance does not mean approval, it means alignment. You can accept pain while still working to alleviate it. You can accept injustice while still acting to correct it. The difference is that you no longer act from hatred or fear, but from clarity. Acceptance gives action its wisdom. Another powerful form of attachment is attachment to thoughts. The mind believes its thoughts are facts, when in truth they are passing clouds. Every opinion, every belief, every interpretation is temporary. Yet people cling to them as if they were eternal truths. This creates division and conflict both internally and externally. The still mind understands that no thought, however noble, can capture the whole of reality. It holds ideas lightly, ready to release them when they no longer serve. This openness is true intelligence. It allows continuous learning, continuous transformation. The rigid mind cannot see beyond its own boundaries. The open mind has no boundaries at all. Letting go of thought also reveals silence, the true source of wisdom. In the quiet space between thoughts, understanding arises effortlessly. You begin to perceive solutions, not by reasoning, but by insight. This is the wisdom of intuition, the knowing that emerges when the noise subsides. It is how the Buddha found enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, not through argument or analysis, but through deep, surrendered seeing. The light of truth revealed itself in the stillness of complete letting go. Many people fear letting go because they confuse it with losing control. They believe that if they stop clinging, life will collapse. But letting go does not create chaos. It reveals order. Control is the illusion that keeps you anxious. When you release control, you discover that life unfolds with a grace that no amount of manipulation could achieve. Think of a river. The more you try to hold the water, the faster it escapes. But if you relax, you can float. Life is like that river. The art of letting go is the art of floating, not resisting the current, but trusting its direction. Even when the river leads you through turbulence, it is still carrying you home. Letting go also includes releasing the past. The mind loves to revisit old stories, replaying them like worn-out films. It believes that by reliving them, it can change the outcome or extract meaning. But the past is smoke. You cannot grasp it. Holding onto it blinds you to the present. The still mind honors the past, but does not live in it. It learns, it forgives, it releases. Forgiveness is perhaps the purest form of letting go. It is the willingness to stop carrying what has already ended. You forgive not to erase the past, but to free yourself from it. The moment you forgive, you reclaim the energy that was trapped in resentment. That energy returns as peace. The same principle applies to the future. Anxiety is attachment to what has not yet happened. The mind projects fears and hopes into an imaginary tomorrow and loses the only moment that is real, now. Letting go of the future means returning to the present, where life actually unfolds. It does not mean abandoning planning or responsibility. It means recognizing that your power lies only in the current breath. The future is created through the quality of this moment's awareness. When the mind is clear now, what follows naturally harmonizes. When the mind is noisy now, no amount of planning can guarantee peace. To master the art of letting go, you must also let go of the idea of mastery itself. Striving to perfect detachment is another form of clinging. The ego can even attach to spirituality, using the path to reinforce its identity. I am advanced. I am enlightened. I am free. True letting go leaves no trace, not even the pride of having let go. When there is no one left to claim progress, freedom becomes complete. The mind dissolves into awareness, and awareness rests in itself, unshaken by change. This is liberation not as an event, but as a continuous state of non-grasping. As you release deeper layers of attachment, a profound peace begins to take root. It is not the peace of absence, but the peace of inclusion. You no longer need to push away or hold on. You allow everything to exist within awareness. The world does not need to change for you to feel free. The mind that lets go lives in harmony with all conditions, joy and sorrow, gain and loss, life and death. These opposites cease to be enemies. They become partners in the great dance of existence. You discover a freedom so vast that even suffering becomes sacred because it too reveals the infinite capacity of awareness to hold all things. This freedom is the essence of enlightenment. The Buddha's final words before his passing were simple. All conditioned things are impermanent. Strive with diligence. To strive with diligence does not mean to struggle. It means to remain awake, to keep letting go moment after moment. Life will always present new forms of attachment, new layers of identity, new opportunities to release. The path never truly ends because awareness continues to expand infinitely. The more you let go, the more spacious you become, and the more life flows through you unimpeded. Letting go is love in its highest form. It is the love that allows everything to be as it is. It is the love that sees beauty, even in endings. It is the love that gives without expecting return. Such love arises naturally in the still mind, because stillness and love are one. When you stop clinging, you stop fearing. When you stop fearing, you start loving. And when you start loving, you realize that letting go was never about loss. It was about returning to the wholeness that was always there. So the invitation remains: soften your grip, let life move, let the past dissolve, let the future rest, let thoughts pass, let emotions flow. Trust the stillness that holds everything. You will find that nothing essential can ever be taken from you, because the essence is awareness itself, untouched, unbound, infinite. If this message of release and freedom resonates with you, if you feel called to explore the deeper wisdom of letting go and living from presence, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Together, we will continue to walk the path of inner stillness, discovering that the true art of life is not in holding on, but in the graceful, luminous act of letting go. Silence as the highest wisdom, returning to the source. At the end of all teachings, beyond all words, beyond the countless methods and concepts, there remains silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of awareness, untouched by thought. The Buddha's wisdom leads every sincere seeker to this realization that truth does not depend on expression, that the ultimate understanding cannot be spoken, because it is not an idea to be communicated, but an experience to be lived. Silence is not a technique or a state. It is the original ground from which everything arises. When the mind finally becomes still, not forced into quiet, but surrendered to what is, the whole structure of illusion collapses. What remains is the vast, luminous field of consciousness itself, where the boundaries between the seeker and the sought dissolve. In that silence, there is no path and no destination, because everything has already arrived. Silence has always been the purest form of teaching. Long before the Buddha spoke, before he explained the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path, he sat beneath the Bodhi tree in absolute stillness. That stillness was his realization. When he opened his eyes and saw the morning star, enlightenment was not a thought, but a recognition. The universe and the observer were one. The birds sang, the wind moved through the leaves, and nothing needed to be added or removed. In that perfect ordinariness lay the sacred. The Buddha spent the rest of his life translating that silent revelation into words, yet every discourse pointed back to the same source, the peace that arises when the mind stops searching. To understand why silence is the highest wisdom, one must first see the limits of thought. Thought can describe but never capture reality. It divides what is whole, measures what is infinite, and names what is nameless. Language is useful for communication, but when used to grasp truth, it becomes a cage. Every word creates an opposite. Every idea becomes a boundary. Silence, on the other hand, is boundless. It holds all possibilities without clinging to any. The still mind recognizes this and stops seeking truth in words. It begins to rest in direct experience, the taste of tea, the warmth of sunlight, the sensation of breath. In these simple, silent moments, the ordinary reveals the extraordinary. Awareness is no longer filtered through concepts. It becomes immediate, vibrant, and total. The practice of returning to silence is not a rejection of thought, but a recognition of its proper place. The mind was meant to serve awareness, not dominate it. But for most people, thought has become the master. It comments, judges, and narrates every experience, leaving no space for direct perception. Silence reverses this order. When you enter silence, you stop feeding the commentator. You begin to listen not to your thoughts, but to life itself. And as the inner chatter fades, what remains is an immense clarity that words cannot convey. This is why the Buddha often answered questions with silence. It was not because he lacked answers, but because he knew that the question itself arose from the noisy mind. In silence, the question dissolves, and so does the need for an answer. The journey toward this understanding is not linear. It unfolds through stages of surrender. At first, silence feels empty, perhaps even frightening. The ego resists it because it thrives on noise. It seeks definition through constant thinking. In silence, definitions disappear. You cannot be a success or a failure, a sinner or a saint, because these are mental constructions. In silence, there is no you to define. There is only presence. This is why silence can feel like death to the ego. But for awareness, it is rebirth. When you no longer identify with thought, you discover a peace that cannot be disturbed, a joy that does not depend on conditions, and a wisdom that requires no proof. This peace is not the opposite of chaos. It is the stillness that contains it. Silence also reveals the illusory nature of time. The thinking mind lives in time, replaying the past, anticipating the future. But silence exists only now. In silence, you realize that the present moment is eternal. It is not a point between two moments. It is the timeless field in which all moments appear. This insight transforms your relationship with life. You stop chasing moments and begin to dwell within them. Every breath becomes complete in itself. The rush to become something ends because you understand that you already are. The idea of enlightenment as a future event disappears, replaced by the recognition that enlightenment is simply the absence of noise, the natural radiance of awareness revealed when striving stops. The stillness of silence also heals. The body, constantly tensed by thought and emotion, begins to relax when the mind quiets. The nervous system, long accustomed to stimulation, rediscovers balance. But the deepest healing occurs in the heart. In silence, the heart opens, not through effort but through recognition. You feel connected to everything because the walls of separation built by language and judgment dissolve. Compassion arises naturally. You understand others not through analysis but through resonance. Their pain is your pain. Their joy is your joy. This is not sentimentality, it is reality. In silence, empathy is not a moral choice, it is perception. As silence deepens, you begin to notice that it is never absent. Even amid the noise of life, the conversations, the traffic, the storms, silence is there, underlying everything. You can hear it between sounds, beneath sounds, and even within sounds. This realization marks a shift in consciousness. You stop seeking silence as a special state to achieve and start recognizing it as the ground of all states. Whether the mind is busy or still, silence remains untouched. It is the canvas on which all experiences are painted. To live from this awareness is to live in freedom. You no longer need to escape the world to find peace, because peace is the essence of every moment. The sages of every tradition have pointed to this truth. Lao Tzu said that the Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao. Jesus often withdrew into silence before teaching. Ramana Maharshi sat in stillness, answering seekers not with discourse, but with presence. The mystics of all ages agree, when the mind stops, the divine speaks through everything. But it does not speak in words, it speaks in being. It speaks in the rhythm of the rain, in the stillness of a mountain, in the gaze of a child. It speaks through the same silence that has been with you since birth and will remain long after death. That silence is not outside you, it is your very nature. The mind often mistakes silence for emptiness because it cannot comprehend fullness without form. But silence is not empty, it is overflowing. It contains all potential. Just as a seed holds the entire tree within it, silence holds the entire universe. From silence thought arises, from silence creation unfolds, and into silence everything returns. To rest in silence is to rest in the source of existence itself. This resting is not withdrawal, it is participation in the deepest sense. When you are silent, you become a vessel for life to express itself freely. Words, actions, and thoughts emerge spontaneously, guided by the intelligence of awareness rather than by egoic will. You live effortlessly, in harmony with the flow of things. This is what the Buddha called right effort, action without struggle, movement without resistance. Silence also refines perception. When the noise of the mind subsides, the senses awaken fully. Colors appear more vivid, sounds more nuanced, touch more intimate. You begin to experience life not through the filter of mental commentary, but directly, as if for the first time. A simple act like drinking water becomes profound, because you are truly there for it. This heightened presence is not a trance, but the return to reality. It reveals that what you sought through spiritual practice was never elsewhere. It was hidden behind the noise of seeking itself. The search ends in silence, because silence was what you were searching for. To abide in silence does not mean to withdraw from society or speech. You can speak, act, and engage with the world while remaining inwardly silent. True silence is not external quiet, but inner spaciousness, the absence of attachment to thought. You can be in conversation and still be anchored in stillness. You can face challenges and still feel the silent depth beneath every action. This integration is the flowering of wisdom. The monk in the mountains and the person in the marketplace can both live in the same silence if their minds are free. The Buddha walked among people, taught and laughed, yet his mind remained unmoved. His silence was not the silence of isolation. It was the silence of understanding. In silence, duality dissolves. You stop dividing life into sacred and profane, success and failure, good and bad. Everything becomes an expression of the same wholeness. You realize that the divine does not hide in temples or texts, but in the simplest moments, the taste of food, the sound of laughter, the act of breathing. The mind that is silent sees no separation between meditation and life. Every gesture becomes meditation, every step becomes prayer. This is the culmination of the Buddhist path, not to escape the world, but to see the world as it truly is, impermanent, interconnected, and inherently complete. The still mind that rests in silence also discovers the mystery of not knowing. Though the intellect wants certainty, but wisdom thrives in openness. To say, "I don't know," is not ignorance, it is humility before the infinite. The wise do not cling to conclusions, they live in wonder. Silence nourishes this wonder. It allows questions to remain alive without demanding answers. In this openness, creativity and insight arise naturally. You see that the universe is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. Each moment invites you deeper into that mystery. The more you surrender to not knowing, the more you realize that awareness itself is the answer. The ego resists this surrender because it fears dissolution, but in truth, nothing real is lost. What dissolves is the illusion of separateness. What remains is consciousness, infinite and alive. When you experience this directly, the search for enlightenment ends. There is no longer a you trying to become enlightened. There is only awareness being aware of itself. This is what the Buddha called nirvana, not a place or an achievement, but the extinction of illusion, the quenching of the fire of craving. Nirvana is the silence at the heart of all existence, the peace that passes understanding. As this silence deepens, gratitude becomes your natural language. You no longer take anything for granted because everything is seen as a gift of consciousness to itself. Every breath, every encounter, every challenge becomes sacred. You bow inwardly to life, not as an act of submission, but as recognition. You see that you have never been separate from the divine movement of reality. Even your mistakes were steps in the dance of awakening. In silence, forgiveness of yourself and others happens without intention. There is nothing left to defend. You are free. Living in silence also transforms your sense of purpose. You no longer ask, "What should I do?" but "What wants to happen through me?" You become transparent, like a clear window through which life can shine. Actions emerge effortlessly, aligned with the flow of things. This state is sometimes called spontaneous virtue. It is not the morality of rules, but the natural expression of wisdom. When the mind is silent, goodness happens without effort because awareness itself is compassionate. This is why the Buddha said that one who knows silence knows the Dharma, the law of truth written not in words, but in being. Eventually you realize that even the idea of practice dissolves in silence. Meditation, mindfulness, letting go, all were fingers pointing to the moon. Once you see the moon, you no longer need to cling to the finger. This does not mean that practice loses value, but that it transforms from effort into expression. Sitting quietly, walking, working, or resting all become practice, because silence infuses them. You live from awareness rather than toward it. This is true liberation, not to escape the world, but to live so fully in it that the boundaries between the spiritual and the ordinary vanish completely. In this silence, death itself loses meaning. You see that what dies is only form, while awareness remains unbroken. Birth and death are waves on the ocean of consciousness, different shapes of the same water. To fear death would be like fearing sleep, when each night you dissolve into the same silence and awaken renewed. The enlightened ones are not afraid to die because they have already died to the false self. They have returned to the source and found it to be eternal peace. And so the path circles back to where it began. All searching ends in silence. All questions dissolve into presence. The seeker disappears, leaving only awareness, vast, radiant, and still. The greatest truths cannot be taught, they can only be remembered. And silence is the memory of the soul, the reminder that beneath every sound, every thought, every movement, you have always been whole. Sit with this truth. Let it penetrate beyond intellect into the quiet spaces of your being. Feel the breath, the heartbeat, the stillness that has been waiting behind every moment of noise. That stillness is your home. Return to it, not just in meditation, but in every step, every gaze, every act of life. Live from silence, and life will speak through you with its own unbroken wisdom. If this teaching on silence and awakening resonates with your journey, if you wish to continue walking the path of mindfulness, clarity, and compassion, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Each reflection shared here is another doorway back to your inner peace. Another reminder that beyond words and beyond thought, silence is where truth lives and where you have always belonged.